The laughter was loud. Champagne glasses clinked, and the air smelled of wealth and arrogance. In the middle of this glittering luxury party, a woman stood at the sink, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes that weren't hers. Her dress, modest but neat, was now splattered with soap and food stains, while guests looked past her as if she were invisible, or worse, beneath them. One man smirked, whispering loud enough for others to hear. Well, someone has to do the dirty work. They chuckled, dismissing her humanity with every careless word. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that gilded room could have imagined, was that the mansion they flaunted themselves in, the very house they considered their playground for the night, didn't belong to them at all. It belonged to her husband. But in that moment, stripped of dignity, forced into silence, she felt the crushing weight of a world that judged her not by her worth, but by her skin. And I ask you, what would you do if you watched someone treated this way? Would you laugh with the crowd, or stand against it? If you believe no one should suffer this way, share this story, because silence only protects the cruel. Her name was Althea. To some, just another face easily overlooked. But to those who truly knew her, she was light itself. She carried herself with quiet strength, the kind of dignity no money could buy. Every morning she woke before dawn, not because she had to, but because she loved the silence, the way the world still felt like hers before everyone else woke up to claim it. She'd slip into her slippers, tie her hair back, and brew her favorite cinnamon tea. The smell filled her kitchen, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She'd hum old gospel songs her grandmother once sang, the kind that reminded her that storms pass, even if they leave scars behind. Her community adored her. Children on the block would chase after her car just to wave, because Miss Althea always had time for them. She carried extra snacks in her bag, not out of charity, but out of habit. "If I have, you have," she'd say with a smile that disarmed even the hardest of hearts. But Althea's life wasn't defined by ease. She knew what it meant to work twice as hard to get half as far. She remembered the looks she got when she first applied for jobs, how her resume seemed invisible the moment they saw her skin. She remembered standing in line at boutiques where no one offered to help, only to watch them rush to assist a woman behind her. These weren't isolated moments. They were patterns, small cuts that bled over time. Still, she didn't let bitterness define her. Her faith, her resilience, and her love for her husband Marcus gave her reasons to rise above. Marcus was everything she had prayed for, a man who saw her not as the world labeled her, but as the queen she was. Successful, respected, and quietly powerful, Marcus never flaunted his wealth. To him, money was a tool, not an identity. And together, they built a home that reflected their shared values. Elegant yet warm, rich yet welcoming. Their mansion wasn't just bricks and marble. It was laughter echoing down hallways, family dinners that turned into 3-hour conversations, and late nights when Althea would curl up a book while Marcus worked on business plans beside her. It was theirs, a safe haven in a world that wasn't always safe. Yet even in her sanctuary, small reminders of prejudice followed her. A delivery man assuming she was a maid, a neighbor asking if she really lived there, a guest once mistaking her for hired help before Marcus gently corrected them. These moments stung, but she tucked them away, hoping they were just misunderstandings. Until that night, the night when a glittering crowd filled her home, when she thought she was walking into a celebration, but instead stepped into humiliation, when whispers and glances sharpened into orders, and when she was no longer Althea, the beloved wife, the neighbor, the friend. She was reduced to the help. This was the night her dignity was tested, and the night their arrogance would meet a truth they could never have prepared for. At first, it was subtle. Althea walked into the grand hall of her own home, wearing a soft blue dress Marcus had picked out for her. She smiled, greeting a group of guests who were already laughing too loudly by the champagne fountain. But instead of returning her smile, one woman's eyes narrowed. She glanced Althea up and down, then leaned into her friend's ear, whispering something that made them both smirk. Althea tried to shake it off. She told herself she was imagining it, that maybe the night's stress was making her sensitive. She moved toward the dining room, where the scent of roasted lamb and fresh herbs filled the air, but every step seemed to invite another sideways glance. Then came the first cut. A man in a tuxedo, holding a half-empty glass, waved her over and said casually, "Sweetheart, could you clear this for me?" He placed a glass in her hands before she could even respond, then turned his back, already dismissing her existence. Her cheeks burned, but she set the glass aside quietly. Soon, another guest approached. "Oh, good. You're here? The restroom needs more towels." The tone wasn't a question. It was a command. The kind of tone you use for staff, not for the woman who lived in the house you were standing in. Everywhere she turned, the assumptions piled on. A napkin tossed her way, a plate shoved into her hands. Someone even whispered, "At least they hired someone who blends in. Feels more authentic, don't you think?" Each moment chipped at her dignity. But she swallowed the hurt, telling herself she could endure it. After all, Marcus was hosting business partners tonight. Powerful investors, wealthy elites who prided themselves on status. This was supposed to be his night, not hers. She didn't want to create a scene, but the demands kept escalating. By the time the clock struck 10, Althea found herself standing by the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing plates while laughter echoed from the grand hall. Her back ached. Her hands stung from hot water. And every now and then, another plate would land with clatter beside her, drop carelessly, without even a word of thanks. Her reflection in the window above the sink looked like a stranger. The elegant dress, now wet and spotted. The necklace Marcus had gifted her on their anniversary, glinting under harsh kitchen lights, out of place against her soap-streaked skin. Inside, something began to crack. She remembered her grandmother's words. "Baby, they'll try to tell you what you are. Don't you ever forget who you are." But how could she remember when an entire room full of people was working so hard to erase her? The psychological toll pressed heavy. The humiliation wasn't just about washing dishes. It was about being forced into a role she hadn't chosen. It was about the laughter that rang out every time she passed, about the way eyes refused to meet hers, about the whispers that reduced her from a wife and hostess to a servant. She tried to find Marcus, but every time she caught sight of him across the room, he was locked in conversation, surrounded by men with expensive watches and sharper egos. She didn't want to interrupt. She didn't want to make him choose between his business and her pain. But the storm inside her kept growing. The point of no return came when a woman, clearly drunk on both wine and entitlement, shouted across the room, "You missed a spot on the silverware. Do it properly, or don't bother at all." The room erupted in laughter. And this time, they weren't whispering. This time, they wanted her to hear. That was the moment it stopped being subtle. It became undeniable, public, and cruel. Althea froze, a plate in her hand, her chest tight, her ears ringing with humiliation. The night had turned into a slow-motion nightmare. She wasn't just being disrespected. She was being mocked, stripped of dignity in her own home. What none of them knew was that the man they were trying to impress, the host they were so desperate to flatter, was her husband, and the silence she held on to was about to shatter. The silver plate in Althea's hand slipped, clattering into the sink with a sound that seemed to slice through the laughter in the room. Her chest tightened, her throat burned, and for a moment, she could hear nothing but the pounding of her own heartbeat. Cold sweat gathered at the back of her neck. The woman's mocking words, "Do it properly or don't bother at all," still echoed, heavy and sharp. Guests leaned back in their chairs, some smirking, others avoiding eye contact, as if ignoring cruelty erased their guilt. Althea's hands trembled. She gripped the edge of the counter, the sting of hot water still burning her skin. The humiliation was too much. Something inside her, something that had endured countless small cuts of prejudice, finally snapped. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the glittering crowd. The room blurred. Faces smeared into a haze of smirks, champagne flutes, and diamond necklaces. Her ears rang, like static drowning out the chatter. She felt small and enormous at the same time, fragile, yet filled with a rage too big to contain. Her voice came out low at first, almost a whisper, but steady. "Enough!" The word hung in the air, startling those closest to her. She stepped forward, soap and water dripping down her wrists, her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The conversations faltered. All eyes turned to her. "You sit here in my home," she said, her voice now louder, sharper, "and you think you can treat me like I'm less than you. You think my skin, my silence, my kindness makes me your servant." A hush fell over the room. Glasses froze midair. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly realizing they had gone too far. But others, the boldest or perhaps the cruelest, still smirked, dismissing her anger as nothing more than an outburst. And then the doors opened. Marcus entered. His presence filled the room instantly, broad-shouldered, calm but commanding. He had stepped away from his business circle, drawn by the tension he felt pulsing through the walls of his own home. His eyes fell on Althea, his wife, standing tall despite the humiliation, and then swept across the crowd. "Althea," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "What's going on here?" Before she could answer, the drunken woman sneered, gesturing with her glass. "Your help doesn't know her place." Marcus froze. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward. His silence was more terrifying than any raised voice. The guests shifted nervously, suddenly unsure of themselves. And then, with piercing clarity, he spoke. "My help." His voice cracked like thunder. "That woman you mocked, the one you ordered around like dirt, that is my wife. This is her home. Every single chandelier above your head, every marble tile beneath your feet. She owns this with me." The room went silent. The arrogant laughter drained away, replaced with the heavy weight of shame. Some gasped. Others lowered their eyes, their confidence crumbling. Althea stood beside Marcus, her head high, tears threatening but never falling. For once, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen by him, by the truth, by the silence that demanded everyone in that room confront their cruelty. The guests shifted in their seats, the realization crashing down like a tidal wave. In her arrogance, they had humiliated the very woman who had welcomed them into her home. And in that silence, broken only by the sound of Althea's breath, steady now, something had shifted forever. The party ended earlier than expected. One by one, the guests slipped out, their high heels clicking against marble floors that no longer felt like luxury, but like judgment. The laughter that once filled the mansion had been replaced with a heavy, awkward silence. No one dared meet Althea's eyes as they left, carrying with them not just their coats, but the shame of what they had done. When the doors finally shut, Althea exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. Her hands were still raw, but it wasn't from scrubbing dishes anymore. It was from holding back the storm inside her. She stood in the center of her home, surrounded by gold and glass. Yet for the first time in hours, she felt like it was truly hers again. Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Never again," he whispered, a promise as much to himself as to her. She nodded, leaning into him. The strength she had carried all night gave way to exhaustion. But there was relief, too, a sense that truth had finally spoken louder than cruelty. The aftermath, however, lingered beyond that night. Althea didn't forget the sting of humiliation, nor the faces that laughed at her pain. But she also didn't let it harden her heart. She carried herself into each new day with the same quiet dignity, proof that no amount of prejudice could define her worth. What changed was the way others saw her. The story spread, whispered through social circles, retold at gatherings where silence could no longer shield the guilty. Those who had once smirked now looked away, reminded that arrogance has consequences, that dignity cannot be stolen, and that truth always reveals itself. But the truth was bigger than just one night in a mansion, because Althea's story was not unique. It was a mirror reflecting the countless others forced to shrink, to swallow, to suffer in silence while the world looked away. Her humiliation was personal, yes, but it was also systemic, and that's the discomfort we cannot escape. How many times has someone been dismissed because of the color of their skin? How many times has someone's humanity been reduced to a stereotype, a role, a joke for the privileged to laugh at? Althea's voice that night, trembling but unbroken, was more than just a declaration of self. It was a reminder to everyone who witnessed it, and to us, that dignity must never be negotiable. But tell me, if you were there that day, would you have stayed silent or stood up for her? This story isn't just hers. It's a reflection of the world we live in. And if it unsettled you, then the conversation cannot end here. Share this. Talk about it, because awareness is the first step to change.